Hi everybody, my name is Sammy Napierala, and myself and Josh will be doing the Session 10 Discussion Facilitation, and our article was actually a chapter from a larger textbook, and the chapter was called Multicultural Assessment, Past Trends and Future Directions, and it was written by Lisa Suzuki, Paul Meller, and Joseph Ponterato, and the larger textbook that this chapter came out of is from a book called The Handbook of Multicultural Assessment, which was published in 1996. So what we're going to talk about is the political and economic climate surrounding multicultural assessment, some recommendations that the authors make for appropriate assessment procedures, and there's several sections under that. So we're going to talk about assessment purposes, test content, alternative methods and procedures, the role of the examiner, and then after that, the authors discuss future directions, conclusions, and at the very end we'll have our discussion questions that will be posted on ELC for y'all. So first, there are a lot of agencies and parties that the authors said have a reason to be connected with assessment. And the biggest one were the test development companies, and they discussed how the test development companies sometimes don't always have the best interests at mind of all the students. But also some other parties involved are educational and institutional systems and racial and ethnic communities in the best case scenario. And so our job as educators is to balance all of these different perspectives while we make sure that the information we're using is updated and empirically based when we assess our minority students. And they also emphasize that we need to be advocates for our students and help explain these assessment procedures that can be very confusing to families so they know what's going on and so they can help interpret these results for themselves. So when it comes to test development, the authors talk about how big of a business that is and how their main investment is to sell their test. But sometimes they do take these racially and culturally diverse issues into account when they're making their tests. But when that data is not available, we have to question and interpret these results very carefully and perhaps gather additional data on these students. And something else they mentioned was that assessment is used so often in education that many times the methods of the assessments that we're using are super rushed because there's all these requirements that teachers have to fulfill, and so their assessments may not be the most accurate. And so using some different qualitative assessment procedures in addition to these standardized tests can help diminish these issues. And so the next session has to do with assessment purposes. And so the authors said that administering standard batteries to everyone fails to take into account individual needs or goals of the intervention that you're actually trying to accomplish. So the question to ask is, what are we actually trying to do with this assessment? And so they suggested utilizing assessment procedures that have been proven to be beneficial, obviously, to the student and have clinical utility and are backed up by that research that I mentioned earlier. They also suggested that in that procedure that we have to make the family aware of the purposes as well as what the results might mean, whether that is with gifted testing or testing for other types of exceptionalities. And the authors also said that local, racial, and ethnic groups should also have a say in what the purpose and meaning of what that assessment is for their community and what, in turn, that could mean for their child. And collaboration between professionals and stakeholders is super encouraged throughout this entire chapter, but in this specific section, they said that it really impacts the assessment process. So next, we talk about test content. So awareness and sensitivity to cultural issues should be considered when interpreting test results. And all tests involve some kind of cultural specificity. So there really isn't an assessment that is completely unbiased despite as many efforts as that person or that developer may have put into that test. And the authors say that there are some that may be culturally reduced, but even those procedures don't eliminate all biases. And so some culture-specific instruments can give you an idea of how different groups compare on the assessments, and there are also some that might tell you some data within a certain ethnic group, but they might not give you details about like specific behaviors or performances of an individual. And they also made a note in this section about translation of assessments that I thought was interesting. They talked about how you need to translate super carefully, and that the method you really should use is called back translation, which is preferred because it ensures equivalence in language and not necessarily meaning, which means that there will be less confusion with that translation for the families. So next in this section for the appropriate procedure is alternative methods and procedures. So ultimately, professionals are responsible for making sure that they provide those assessments that are culturally sensitive and have that information in them. So some examples of that would be those curriculum-based measures, performance-based assessment, and qualitative assessment procedures that you can use in conjunction with standardized measures. I think always, regardless of, what you're doing your assessment for, you need to, if it's standardized, have other types of measures that also have input in whatever goal you're trying to achieve, whether that's identification for giftedness or identification for some other program. Just having multiple things that you can fall back upon is really important. And so assessment procedures in general should really be established together with the individual, community, and agency professionals for greater cultural sensitivity, like I mentioned earlier. And so examiners should realize that important others, such as family members, can supply that important information about the student that we might not get from that standardized assessment. And furthermore, establishing rapport with that student. So actually knowing the student, knowing their behaviors that might relate to their culture can really impact test results. So the more that you know about the student, the more that you might be able to explain some of the things that happen within their test. And so results should be shared with the examinee and their family in a language that is understood best to them. So this results in an honest dialogue that is beneficial to the student and their family in the best way.
Hey everyone, going to continue off where Sammy left off. So in 1989, McShane noted the importance of various qualifications the examiner should have when testing members of diverse populations. He brought forth the following questions to do so. What is the extent of the professional's cultural and community-specific knowledge? What is the level of technical competence for said professional? Is this professional's shared knowledge primarily based in research, or is it clinical in nature? Is this professional's personal knowledge a result of personal interpretation of experiences, or a result of systematic collection of data? Has this professional adapted the knowledge he/she shares with other professionals based off of his/her own idiosyncratic knowledge and different methods? Is the professional's focus specific to a certain domain, or can it be characterized by systematic comprehensiveness? Does he only concern himself with school, or characterization across biological, psychological, sociological, and cultural levels? Does his/her strength lie in team functioning or individual functioning? And lastly, does his/her expertise lie in diagnosis, intervention, prescription, or some combination of the aforementioned? One quote that he mentioned towards the end of all these different questions was, as professionals, we must self-monitor our personal level of assessment expertise with respect to members of racial and ethnic minorities. And I thought this was a really good fit for this chapter. So hopefully by now it is clear that we need to do more to assess individuals from diverse ethnic and racial backgrounds in a variety of culturally sensitive approaches. While some progress has been made, there is always room for improvement. No matter what field you're working in, there's always room for improvement. So the authors provided several future directions they believe will help assess the true potential of individuals from diverse backgrounds. So developing alternative measures and procedures to be used in the assessment process with diverse populations. We used to be a test-focused society. Don't get me wrong, while testing is very important, we have begun realizing the realistic limitations of all assessment procedures with respect to racial and ethnic minority groups. No clinical or educational decision should be made on a single source of information. This is something that definitely resonated with me, being somebody in a very statistical background. You don't make any decisions off of one piece of information. Something we always tell people in our introductory statistics classes is you need more than 30 in your sample size for it to be considered good. So definitely want more than one single source of information. It's important for everybody to understand the ethnic norms. Individuals come from different cultural groups, and they may respond differently to tasks presented based upon what is considered culturally acceptable. Continuing to increase our knowledge with respect to the diverse populations we serve is imperative. Definitely true. Increasing collaboration with bilingual and bicultural professionals. Professionals that are bilingual and or bicultural are more likely to be aware of the subtle nuances for their respective cultural groups, and they can also serve as bridges to establish the flow of connection between communities. Developing a broader conceptual framework for the practice of psychological assessment would also be great. It would be very beneficial to have training programs infused with information regarding particular procedures with ethnic minority group members. Special practica focusing on the assessment of individuals that are culturally different could be very beneficial in regards to training students and preparing them for a diverse workforce. Increasing literature and research available regarding multicultural assessment procedures. Additional research is always beneficial. It never hurts to have more information, especially on something that's brand new and growing. Increasing a racial and ethnic community involvement in the assessment process. Similarly to how those bilingual and bicultural people would be beneficial, the involvement of various community members can greatly benefit the assessment process. These individuals can provide insight on different cultural cues across their different communities. So, here's some conclusions. Our attempts to make culturally fair assessments have repeatedly failed. Since there are not only differences across different cultural groups, but differences amongst those similar groups, creating some type of a cookie-cutter, one-size-fits-all assessment just doesn't seem to work. There is plenty of information already available regarding the use of traditional measures in a variety of testing areas, including intelligence, nonverbal reasoning, personality, neuropsychology, achievement, vocational interests, and infant and preschooler development. There are plenty of other areas with copious information available too. We must use a plethora of complex factors integrated in our tests to get a comprehensive picture of each unique individual. So some discussion questions we have for you. What alternate testing procedures does your school district use that are beneficial to racially and ethnically diverse students? What are some improvements that could be made based on what we told you in the reading? And another one, what are some of the flaws you see with testing procedures in your school district? And that about wraps it up for us. Thanks for listening.